Lovely, Karina.
Thanks, Saki. So remind me, do we have until 10:30?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm aiming to talk perhaps for 35 minutes, 40 minutes, and then leave a good amount of 20 minutes for discussions and questions and for people's thoughts about it. Right, so I'm going to share.
So any questions, pop them in the chat as well, or put your hand up and we can ask them as we go through. I'll look after that.
Can you see that? Not yet.
Not yet.
Strange, because it's open. Bear with me. Is it open?
Do you have the slides? Do you want me to share them for you?
Hold on a sec. It's now open. Okay, bear with me. Should come up in here. So, oh, there we go.
It's not showing yet.
Yeah, but at least it's showing in here now that I couldn't see it before. So more actions. Show conversation, hi participants. Don't know. Okay, let me see. Sorry about this. I practiced this precisely to get this done. Can you see now?
Yeah, something fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just need to make it like that. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone for the patience. And I just need to, oh, sorry, I went. Right. And now I'm going to put you, can you see me and see my presentation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Looking
Sorry.
good.
Okay, we're ready. Here we are. Right. So this presentation is about how the infant's brain and mind develops in the context of the baby's relationship with his mother. And I will be explaining how this early relationship has a vital impact on the development of the neural networks and functional brain structures of a baby's brain. So we'll be highlighting the importance of the first 3 years of life, which are the critical years during which major developments takes place. One of them is that during these first years, we see the first, if we can call it, personality traits of a baby starting to emerge. And it is also during this period when crucial psychological but also neurological processes take place in order to later enable the child to manage and regulate his emotions and to postpone gratification and to cope with the stress later on in life as an adult. And it's finally, and also during this period, it's when the child will learn, and I think this is one of the most relevant part of the connection between infant brain development and the impact of the mother and baby relationship, is that it's during this period when the child will learn and internalize the first and most important model of relationship, a model that will inform the way that he will relate to others. And it is primarily based on the child's experience of attaching to his mother. So I will be talking about attachment, about Bowlby's theory of attachment. So a little bit how it's going to work today. Just before I start the presentation, I would like to clarify that I will be using the term of mother as a general way to refer to the primary carer. It could be the adopted father, or the father, or the grandmother, whoever is in charge of this baby. So the presentation has divided in two parts. In the first part, I will be talking about the importance of the environmental influences on the brain growth, specifically about the impact of early early experiences with the mother and the forming of attachment. And in the second part, I will be explaining the infant brain development and the brain structures that underlie this mother and infant relationship. And at the end, hopefully, we will have 15 to 20 minutes to talk and to discuss. So let's start by highlighting the fact that the brain development begins at early stages in pregnancy. And I'll go through this very quickly because I'm sure you're all familiar with this. And if we look at the embryonic development, we see dramatic changes in the first 10 weeks. Let me see if I can show it here. No, not yet. So let's start. If we take conception, let's start from the beginning. When the sperm fertilizes the egg as our starting point, and we count that as a week 1, we will see that about week 2, as I point out in here, the fetus, this embryo, presents the heart, and a process of cell proliferation has begun, which is an extraordinary production of cells that will later become and form the brain. In week 4, we can see signs of limbs and eye, and the process of cell reproduction continues. And at week 6, these cells start to migrate. We don't get to see that, but that's what happens at week 6, to move to where they need to be and organize themselves to later fulfill a function as a part of the central nervous system. And finally, in week 10, you can see a basic structure of a formed brain, which now needs to grow. And it is really impressive how in 10 weeks a cell can become an embryo and then turns into a fetus. But a great deal of development happens during the first year of life. And research in the field now has revealed that at birth, an infant brain has only about 25% of its adult weight. After 6 months, it reaches 50% of adult size and 75% at the end of the second year. So that means that most of the growth of the brain happens in the first 2 years of life. And this growth depends on 2 factors. One is the infant's genes, and the second is the environmental influence. And this could easily invite us to, to the controversial debate about nature versus nurture. But for the moment, we will focus on nurture, meaning the impact of the environment. The environment as meaning which is mediated by the mother. So the baby's environment is, as I said, is mediated by mainly the mother, and a mother who hopefully will be available not only to be able to be there physically, but also emotionally to the baby, and to be able to respond to the baby's physical and emotional needs. For example, if the baby cries because he's feeling frightened, then the mother would respond in a timely manner by holding him, attuning to her or to his emotional responses. Attuning to more to his emotional state, as that's a better way of saying, in order to, or looking to calm the baby down and trying to somehow eliminating the discomfort and restoring a sense of safety in the baby. And it is throughout these experiences that their bond and relationship begins to emerge. So this talk a little bit about the relationship and the process of bonding, because it takes time as both mother and baby are finding ways to get to know each other and to learn how to respond to each other. And ideally, the baby will experience a mother able to attune herself to his internal experience and to meet his needs, not only the physical needs, but also the emotional needs of warmth and security and protection. And we all know that these infants' needs of security and protection are the basis of what Bowlby called attachment. And it is precisely through these experiences of having a caring mother sensitively responding and regulating the infant's needs over and over again, where a secure attachment is formed. Let's talk about attachment. So attachment is a special bond between the infant and attachment figure. This bond is based on the infant's needs for safety, security, and protection. Loss or threat of loss of the person evokes intense distress. This early bond will have a huge emotional and social impact that continues throughout life. Yeah. So how Bowlby explain attachment? He has his view. Yeah, and he believed that babies were born with an intrinsic need to form affective ties, to instinctively seek closeness with their mothers, with the purpose of feeling protected and safe. Yeah, so he believed that they actually were born with a repertoire of behaviors and reflexes whose purpose were to attract and maintain closeness with the mother, so she can reduce and completely eliminate uncomfortable or overwhelming feelings of restlessness or anxiety or overexcitement, and to restore the feeling of a sense of calm and safety in the baby. So he was of the view that that baby then was born with a biological need to attach to his mother. But this is not enough. The secure attachment of the baby to his mother will also depend on the mother's ability to respond to the physical and emotional needs of the baby. And in this interaction between the mother and the baby begins to develop a pattern of behavior and response between them, which later become the first and most important model of intimate relationship for the baby. And he will learn from this experience with the mother what to expect from others, whether the other is available and interested and able to help him, and whether or not he's lovable, worthy of love. And this first model of intimate relationship will inform and impact the way that the baby, and later when he becomes a child, later when he becomes an adult, it will inform the way that he will relate to others. Yeah, and this model will get imprinted in the brain. So how that model works in terms of the expectations of the experience of the baby they have had with the mother is, for example, if the baby cries because he's hungry and his need is met by a responsive and loving caregiver, then he will learn that he has a positive effect on the other and that the other is available and interested in him. And the experience will foster a sense of feeling lovable and worthy of love. And we can see a little bit about how we see the opposite in our practices. In terms of the clients that we work in the perinatal service. So as we're talking about attachment, we somehow are talking as well a little bit about affect regulation. And I think this is a concept that might be familiar to all of you. As I was saying, the baby needs an adult who could help him to calm down in order to reestablish the sense of security and the feeling okay. And initially will be the mother who will be helping the baby to regulate his emotional state by attending to his emotional distress, his been upset, or he's been frightened, or he's been overtired, and helping him to make sense of it and to recover from it. And it is through having this experience over and over again of a parent regulating the emotional experience of a baby when the baby gradually learns to internalize that function and to become self-regulating later on in life. So he will be more able to tolerate waiting. He will be more able to anticipate because his experience has been consistent of someone who would actually be able to recognize and able to help him when he becomes distressed or he's hungry or he's frightened, etc. So a way of helping the baby to regulate himself is by mirroring his emotional states and by attuning to his emotional state. And I'm just going to quickly go through the mirroring. Oh, it's not coming up. There we go. So mirroring is when a mother copies the baby's facial expression, usually of distress, as we can see in this picture. And in this way, the mother enables the baby to find a reflection of himself in the mother's eye, on her mind, and the feeling of being seen and recognized in the eyes and in the mind of the mother. And throughout this experience of being mirrored, the baby can learn to know about his own emotions. Attunement involves an adult, and this is very important because all these functions are more maternal functions. They need to be done by an adult, not by a child. The baby needs to feel the sense of security and safety, and I think that's provided by an adult, functioning adult, not by another child. And attunement involves an adult being able to resonate with the emotional state of a baby. You know, if the baby is kind of waking up, the mother should kind of fine-tune the intensity and duration of that stimulation by talking in a low voice, more calmly. And if the baby is overexcited, then the mommy can actually engage in this kind of tone of voice and bringing him into connecting at that level and perhaps helping him to calm down if that's what he needs to. And in this way, the mother helps the baby to actually calm him down when there is so much overexcitement or he's restless, or to kind of bring him up into a little bit more, helping him to come out of the withdrawing by bringing him in slowly up into a different intensity. Now I would like to move. So let me check the time. Yeah. So I would like to move on to how parent-infant interaction impacts the infant's brain development. In other words, how the infant's brain develops in the context of the baby's relationship with his mother. So I'm going to quickly go through a few things in here in terms of the brain. As I mentioned before, the brain is made of cells, millions of them, that migrate to specific places during the early weeks of pregnancy and throughout the postnatal phase. They migrate to specific places, yeah, and organize themselves. And they need to organize themselves to fulfill a function. And these cells, these million cells, are called neurons. And a neuron, I'm sure you're very familiar, it's the nerve cells that transmit information in the brain. And very quickly, the neuron has 4 basic parts. The axon is this long string, which is covered with a fatty layer called myelin that helps speed the transmission of information. And this is what we start losing as we age. That's where we become slower. And it's also been seen in dementias like Alzheimer's. It has to be with memory when we lose this myelin. So then that we have the dendrites in here. This is where the neuron receives the information from another neuron. And then we have the axon terminals. That's where the information goes from this neuron to the next one. So kind of it works that you receive the information from all the neurons through the dendrites and sends the information along the axon through the axon terminus into the next neuron. And that's how the information flies, and it flies in microseconds. So when 2 neurons connect with each other, as we're seeing here, it's called synapses. And neural networks are formed by activations of synapses. That means when one neuron connects to the other, information is passed on. And networks are formed by activations of a connection of one neuron to another and another and another and so on. So these networks, and we have a little bit of an idea how they're looking here, are transmitting information back and forth. And they are formed originally by, as I say, activation of synapses. So when an infant is exposed to a stimulus of experience, for example, as we see here, his mother's smile, a path of circuits will be activated in areas related to emotional functioning. And if this experience is repeated over and over again, then these circuits will become hardwired and will get imprinted in the brain. So what will happen in the brain of a baby during the first years of life will be activations of synapses, and that will depend on the type and frequency and quality of stimulation that the baby will be exposed to. For example, if the baby has the experience of having a sensitive caregiver or a mother, being able to respond and regulate the baby's physical and emotional experiences in a timely and consistent manner, this experience will activate pathway circuits in areas related to emotional functioning. And those emotional functioning areas in the brain are the limbic system and areas, not to get in much in depth because we don't have much time. Let's say that the limbic system is one of the system of the brain which gets activated. And that's exactly precisely where the baby's stress response system is also embedded. So if the baby has that experience of mom being constantly responding and being available, then it will activate neurons and neuropath in areas that related to emotional functioning. And in this way, the baby will experience a variety of emotions and learn that these states will be recognized and regulated by the other. If again, these experiences are repeated over and over again, then these circuits will become hardwired and will get imprinted in the brain. And this applies not only to emotional areas, this also applies to motor and cognitive experiences as well. If the baby has a mother talking and singing and reading to her, then the baby will be stimulating neural activity in language-related areas in the brain. Now, the lack of experiences will also be reflected in the baby's brain by showing less neural networks, less activation of synapses, and less complexity in their networks. And lack of experience can be related to perhaps what we see, a very depressed mom or an over-anxious mother being preoccupied with their own state of mind and not being likely to be available to respond in a timely manner or consistently to the emotional needs of the baby, to be soothed, to be regulated, or to be played with, also to stimulate positive emotions. So you can see how the architecture of the baby's brain is shaped by the experience of the baby with his mom and in the context of that relationship, and how these neural networks and synapses will be greatly shaped by that relationship and the nature of that relationship. So this picture on the right shows a cross-section of the cortex, human cortex, that have been photographed and the neurons have been stained. You can really appreciate how complex the networks become. The more experience that the baby have, the more complex and dense this network will become. Particularly if they have positive emotional experience, this will be vital, which is crucial during the first year of life, first years of I would say the first 2 or 3 years. And when I'm talking about positive emotional experience, I'm talking about the experience of being held, soothed, understood, play with, enjoyed by the mother, will greatly impact the architecture of the baby's brain and its capacity to achieve a higher level of functionality. So on the left, as you can see here, this is how I just thought to show you how a mature neuron looks like. And as you can see, it has a long axon and its branches has multiplied. Imagine how many synapses this neuron can form if it makes use of all these extensions. So what happens during the first years of life is that the amount, perhaps if we see in contrast with adults, the amount of synapses in an adult brain it's still hard to comprehend. But we think that on average, an adult brain has had a quadrillion synapses. I don't know what it would look like, quadrillion. I can't relate to that number. The capacity of the infant's brain to produce synapses early in life is extraordinary, especially during the first 18 months of life. And it is believed that an infant brain produces twice as many connections as those in an adult's brain. So you can imagine the potential for that brain to be shaped and sculptured. So this proliferation of synapses is a crucial process in the development of the brain. But at the same time, if we have that overproduction, the brain goes through the process of pruning. And this is a natural process where there is a reduction of dendrite cells and connections between cells. So those synapses which are pruned are because they were not used. In other words, prune is due to lack of use. So the networks that get used prevail in the brain, and those that are not reinforced get pruned. For example, a classic example is infant language development, for example, depends on the experience of the infant having an adult talking to him, singing, reading to him. And in doing so, the infant's brain gets to activate the circuits that are responsible for language development. And the constant activation of these circuits prevents them being pruned because they're being used over and over again. But if these circuits are not activated, like for example, those moms who are finding it hard to relate and to talk to their babies, these circuits then don't get activated, they don't get used, then when the pruning comes, it's more likely to take then it's more likely to, just got distracted with something happening here, but I'm back again. It's more, so the pruning, well, where I was, but these circuits, if they're not activated, yeah. In other words, they don't get used, then pruning is more likely to happen. And this could have major implication for language development. So we can see here, this is on the left, a pattern of network that have been used over and over will be imprinted in the brain. And this is a good example in here. This is networks, a little bit of how it may look at child's birth. Then we go through the proliferations of neuron and pruning. But it shows in here when he's 7, it says he has used some of them because they have prevailed, but there is all sort of process of proliferation and then pruning again, and specifically in the teenage phase, there is a lot of plasticity in terms of pruning. So there is a lot of plasticity and a capacity for the brain to reorganize itself. So what happens when there is severe neglect, I would say, is related to a severe pruning. And I'm talking about severe cases in here, no, perhaps cases where children have been deprived in orphanage or completely deprivation of even being touched. But there are all that will be the extreme, because I'm going to show you the next. I'm going to show you an MRI that shows the extreme neglect. But if we relate to a neglect that is not that extreme, which are the cases of the toddlers of babies, which have not been held or rocked or sung or talked to that often, those who are not being kept in mother's mind and whose emotional and physical needs have not been met. And in those cases, if these neurons have not been stimulated, used, or activated, they will make connection, not neural networks. And in those emotional areas that we're talking about, those neurons may die. And that's what happens with pruning. When they have not been used, then the pruning process comes and takes away what has not been used. So the process of neglecting, it's reflected in the brain through significant loss of connection between neurons or the activations of a network. And this is the MRI that I was talking. This is severe. Most of you might be familiar with this slide. This has been on the net for many years already. The left-hand scan shows the brain of a normal 3-year-old with healthy brain development. And the right-hand scan shows the brain of a child of the same age who suffers severe neglect. And as you can see, there are dramatic differences in size and the lack of neural mass. What I mean is the grayness. This shows that there is a density of gray matter, neuron synapses in cells. As you can see, this is much bigger than this. Here, the density of the gray matter neurons has actually decreased. The ventricles has enlarged. And what is very dramatic about this is that the brain is not just a stop growing, but also shrinks. And that is by the lack of stimulation. So during these 3 years of life that we've been talking about, there is a propensity of the infant's brain to change its neural networks in response to stimulation or lack of it, So that means that the infant needs to be exposed to experiences of, as we said, touch, sight, sound, smell, but also to be held, kissed, rocked, sung to by his mother in order to develop emotionally. And each of these experiences will create synapses, then later on will become patterns of synapses. And by repetition of the same experience over and over again, will become hardwired in the brain. So just gonna stop here for a bit to see how we do. Okay, how's everyone so far?
Good.
Yeah,
we're good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
Okay,
good.
good.
That's very interesting.
great.
So we're just gonna do a little summary up to now. It's a shame I cannot see you, so that's what I'm asking you. Are you okay? So I'm just gonna quick summary here to where we're at. We have talked about how the infant brain develops mainly in the first 2 years of life, and how the development depends on the environment that he's exposed to and the relationship with his mother. I have explained that during the early infancy, there is a extraordinary production of neurons and synapses, allowing the brain a full potential to be organized, by the baby's experience within his relationship with his mother. And I also have mentioned the process. There is a process of overproduction of synapses on the brain that goes through, as well. There is a pruning, which get rid of those neural networks that have not been used. And this is what it shapes the architecture of the brain. And I point out just now how excessive pruning relates to neglect. Yeah. Now I would like to kind of go, and this will be the last bit of the presentation, to talk about briefly about brain's critical periods for development. So critical periods are when there is an overproduction of synapses, and when a particular experience is needed to happen in order for the brain to develop normally. For example, there is a critical period for development of language. So if during the first language develops up to, goes on 7 years old and even more and more, it's one of those critical periods. But there is a time where certain stimulation needs to happen for those areas and functions to develop. Yeah. And research into this critical period of brain development, it's ongoing. And there are a number of critical periods that they have been identified. But I would like to talk about 2 today, which I think are relevant. Yeah. The first one is this critical period happens during the 2nd month of life, week number 6, around that. And there is a critical period where there is an increase of synapses connections in the visual areas, which happens in the visual areas and the occipital lobe, right in here. So this is when that system, the visual system, it's ready. Let me get this right. No, this is when the neural system responsible for vision is ready to receive visual stimulation in order to develop a more controlled and focused vision. And it is precisely when the baby, I don't know if you can see the babies that we see around week 6 and 8, you can see that they're starting to make eye contact. And they are, in fact, registering familiar faces at that age. It is really important that the face-to-face interaction at this stage, in particular the mother's gaze, which is the primary and perhaps the only source of visual affected information for the baby. And at this stage, the baby is fully aware of the difference between an attentive adult and the one who is not. And saying this is not that you're going to run to see mums and encourage them desperately to look at their babies because a critical period is happening and they need to be doing that. No, it's for us to be aware that it's an important stage in the development where it will be important for the baby to be seen, to start to be seen, to be engaging in that gaze with the mother. So these critical periods has a window. They happen in certain times and that window is over. But because the infant brain is very, it has the capacity to change its connections. It has that flexibility of being more malleable. There is chance to kind of repair things, if we put it that way. Then the most relevant critical period that I wanted to bring today is this one. Is there is a critical period for emotional development that starts from birth until the age of 3 years. That doesn't mean that the cutoff is 3 years. It means that they are very crucial, important events happening during these first 3 years. And there is a significant synaptic growth in the right hemisphere and limbic systems and others. And these are the structures underlying the processes of affect regulation and the attachment process. Yeah, so there is an overproduction and a massive amount of growth in synapses in these areas of the brain, which are ready to be shaped. And these are the right hemisphere and the limbic system, together with other structures, is what underlines this process of affect regulation and attachment. And this brings the importance of a consistent and sensitive care and nurturing environment precisely during that time where the process of attachment is forming and where we're starting to help the baby to regulate his emotions, because we're building the basis, the neurobiological basis for that to develop. Then we talked, I just thought about bringing this, because as we're talking about affect regulation and we have mentioned a little bit about neglect, perhaps to talk a little bit when things go the other way, not neglect, when there is abuse, or the baby's in a context where there is tension. You know, mom and dad are constantly in a row, or there is a lot of financial or housing stress, and the baby is exposed to what at that point will feel very toxic, because he doesn't have the emotional resources to deal with that, but he can feel and sense the tension, yeah? Or he's been frightened by what is happening around him. So there is this very, we don't need to go through this, but the HPA Axis is what is called the stress response system. And it has this very elaborated name, you know, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. I don't think we need to go in detail into this, but it's just to show very quickly that when stress is impacting the baby, usually this is a system that the brain then goes in touch with glands and hormones and so on, to finally, what we need to understand, that produces a substance called cortisol. It goes through all this process to bring this, and the cortisol will actually say, you need to be alert, you need to run now. It helps somehow the baby or the person to, well, more the adult, to be in alert, or to be determined that something is threatened and what to do. Yeah. Now, these help us to survive. These help us to, when it's working, it helps you to deal with the stress. Yeah. For the baby, when he brings cortisol and the mom comes and help him, he's been stressed because he's hungry, or because he heard a door slamming. Then he was startled and he cried, and then mom and created cortisol because he's just a little bit stressed about it. Mom comes and helps him and soothes him and helps him to regulate emotions and go back to normal. But when these situations are an ongoing chronic situation, then the system is overflowed with cortisol. And this is what it damages, and it creates disruption to the system. And if it is taking place at early stages, the consequences will be more difficult. It will become more complex, because the basis of what it needs to be working is already been disrupted. So just to give you a little bit of the two sides of the story, when neglect happens, how we see in the neural network, you know, decrease of connections and synapses, and when it's stress or perhaps more abusive experience where the baby has been exposed to, this is what it gets impacted. And I think we have come towards the end. So the key points, you know, the infant brain development is mainly shaped by the mother's relationship. I think we have how important is the early intervention in the first years of life. And then we have come to the end, giving us 10 minutes. So let me come out of okay. Any thoughts? Any question?
Thank you, Karina. That was really, really interesting, and actually really just pins down exactly what kind of happens. So you can kind of process it better. I was thinking how much pruning has happened for myself while I was watching that. But yeah, any questions for Karina? Does anybody have anything they would like to ask or discuss?
No, thank you. Just to add that, yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you.
Great.
Good.
Hi, thank you, Karina. I got a question. This is really interesting. I did the Circle Security Parenting group, so I got to understand a lot more about the bonding attachment relationship, and but I got questions specifically related to repair. And I'm interested in the aspect of repair in mother and child relationship through the second pregnancy or second child. For example, the first child, the first pregnancy or first child, it did not have any attachment. It's the thing what you describe a lot of things being what's the word, being missed out, and it wasn't possible. But then somehow the second pregnancy or full the care under your service thing have been changed. So I wonder what way to, somehow I feel the second pregnancy in a way has a repair the first one. So I want to know what aspect of repair. So it's a question, I don't know whether is it some way, whether any service outside your service that work with the repair, because for mother who did not know or did not have access to your service at the first pregnancy, but through second pregnancy realizing, oh, there's a lot of things have been missed out, and even securely holding a child, it wasn't possible due to physical weakness and trauma, birth, etc. So it was impossible. So I wonder, in terms of repair, what's a possibility? Yeah, I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit complex.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is not that things are. What I wanted to say is that things are not perfect in any way, and what you mean about repairing is perhaps the relationship with the first child, with the first pregnancy, what he didn't get, how things could actually be compensated, or how things could actually be work out for the two of you have been together, for him to get what he didn't. And that's something that could actually be seen. It will be more in depth to get a sense of what is it that you would like to change. And of course, perhaps I think our service can direct you to the professions could actually help with that. But it's an ongoing process, and there are a lot of things that will be missing at different points, and how parents and babies and parents and children learn to kind of overcome. And the idea is that when things doesn't go well, is how we repair things. And that's what you're looking into it. So I'm sure that if you are already in touch with one of our colleagues, you could actually raise that, because they could actually, perhaps depending on the age of the child, what you need to you feel that you would like to kind of address, it would require more conversation, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would think I will get in touch with your service and looking specific on that.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. Yeah, thanks.
Good.
Great. We've got 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question. about because if baby is already abused and didn't attach a proper attachment with the parents, how can we help the babies and families?
Yeah, I think that what is very important about the baby's brain at that stage and during the first 2 years is very it has the flexibility which doesn't happen with the brain in adults. If to change, it could easily be helped, not easily, but it has the capacity to reorganize himself depending on the experience. So if you have had a very difficult experience, and everyone may have a different experience in life, is how that experience has been, how the parents is helping the child to make sense of it, yeah, and how the child learns that these things could actually get better, and what would be a way of repairing these things. And children attach either securely or insecurely. They don't. It's not that they don't attach. They ended up attaching somehow. And it's how we can perhaps look into ways of providing the experience of reparation, because then they get the sense that there is someone interested and then available and keen to help them, and even not knowing how, they are there, and it's to begin with. Sometimes even not knowing what it is, if they feel that you're there. Does that? I'm not sure if it depends on the level of abuse, resilience of the child, and it will depend on all sort of things of what.
Yeah. And also this is a really, I think it's really interesting, the training, but I couldn't understand 100% because of my language barrier. But so I heard that you are recording this training. So how can I access the recording, this one?
I was just thinking about that too, because there was something about maybe we put them onto YouTube.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
We'll hopefully let people know where to access them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, if there's no more questions, I think we can finish. And just to say thank you, Karina, that was really, really good.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you for everybody for coming. And there are a few more sessions. We've got one on fathers and perinatal mental health at 11:30, and then a little bit on circle of security later. And then at 3:30, I think we're just inviting everybody to come and meet the team, really. So like a team check-in.
What time is that, Aki?
3:30.
Okay. I'm gonna try to pop in.
So yeah, that's just for general hi and any questions anyone might have for us. So great. All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye.
Thank you.